30 серпня.
It's 30th of August, and we're welcoming you at Ukrinform, Ukraine Media Center. My name is Svetlana Chipranka. Today, the world marks the International Day of the Disappeared. As of the beginning of May 2023, about 23,000 Ukrainians were included in the Unified Register of Persons Missing in Special Circumstances. Among them are military personnel, civilians, and children. Today, we're going to talk about how families of the people missing in Ukraine lived during the war. We're welcoming Alyona Lunyova, Director of Advocacy at the ZMINA Human Rights Center, representative of the Secretariat of Ukraine 5 AM Coalition. Olena Belyachkova, Coordinator of POW Family Groups at the Media Initiative for Human Rights. Maryna Lypovetska, Head of the Child Tracing Service of the Magnolia NGO. Olena Dobycha, Head of the NGO POLYGON 56. And Olesya Aulina, Head of the NGO United by the Sea. Before we start, let's just explain the term persons missing under special circumstances. What do you mean by that? Well, I guess I'll start. Greetings. When we mention people missing under special circumstances, well, these are people that makes it impossible for these people to look for them by the police. And these special circumstances can be war, natural disasters. Well, these are circumstances that make it impossible to look for these people. When this law was adopted 5 years ago, well, first we talked about people who were missing on occupied territories because the government can't look for them because they don't have access to these territories. And we used different search groups and occupied territories. We used special coordination between NGOs and governmental agencies. We understood that some NGOs can have information about these people because they are looking and caring for these people and their families. Of course, after the full-scale invasion in February 2022 changed the circumstances. Despite the fact that this armed conflict is ongoing, the situation has changed. And what we had in 2016 when the draft law was designed and 2 years later when it was adopted, it's different from today's situation. People missing under armed conflict or any other circumstances, they have to be found because this is the general vector of our policy, of the state policy, because we are looking for these people until their location is identified. That's very important to support their families, and this is what the law is about. But in 5 years, we mark the 5th anniversary of that law. And we mentioned that not everything works efficiently. Some of the tools introduced last year, for example, the position of the missing persons ombudsperson under the Ministry of Reintegration of Occupied Territory. This position, this role will be abandoned because media spread information about that. And we're a bit concerned about that because this position, this person that should be responsible for the coordination with the families and law enforcement agencies and other agencies responsible, well, we're a bit concerned that it will be abandoned. And it has to be justified, and we need to understand how families are supposed to communicate with the government about things that they face. I think my colleagues will talk about that in details. And it's very important to have that position, to have that person within the government, and they should stay in touch with the families. Why do you think this person this position is abandoned, and what can be the circumstances? We didn't hear any justification for that, because why we don't know why they had to share these responsibilities between the Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Internal Affairs, and other agencies. These persons should be responsible for the coordination, and we need to understand who's going to be responsible for the communication. And the state needs to make a decision, not just saying that these people will be responsible for that. If we don't have a special person, a special dedicated ombudsperson, it will be hard to identify the location of these people and find out what is the investigation process. And we don't know what the governmental policy in terms of these missing persons will be. Well, let's get to the next question. What about the search? How the searches are conducted right now in the country? The way it happens, it is coordinated, just like Olena said, by the ombudsperson regarding missing people under special circumstances. This is a person that's responsible for the communication between families, state agencies, institutions, and the national police is responsible for the search missions. And it happens after the family is notified about their family member is missing, after the criminal case is opened. There is a special procedure and a roadmap for POWs defined by the coordination staff regarding POWs. So there's a list of institutions the families can address. So now we have a unified register of person missing under special circumstances, and the official document for the person to be in this register is a special excerpt from that registry or register. This is the only official document that provides that these families with a special status, including special funding, and also providing them with a special status documents, special status and guarantees. And meanwhile, these families face the situation when drafting offices, they are trying to require more documents from these families. They're trying to require a special court verdict from them, which is not legitimate. And speaking about communication, the ombudsperson is supposed to solve these situations using consultations, requests. So these families, they don't have to face these problems alone. So there should be someone to help them regulate these things. And speaking about military personnel, the coordination staff regulates these meetings with families of such missing persons, and the coordination staff has joined the process regarding civilian persons. But since there is no mechanisms for searching for these people, it's becoming harder and harder. And other agencies like the International Committee of Red Cross, they have a better mandate in terms of accessing places where these people are held. And this register is a unified register, and it's a database that consolidates all information about civilians, military personnel, and children. So all these agencies, they need to communicate, including communication with the families. If this position will be abandoned, well, they need to assign someone who will be responsible for the communication, because they can't just distribute these responsibilities between different people and agencies, because it makes it harder, since these families are stressed and they go through difficult situations anyway. And speaking about the prisoners of war, the families can also send a request to the Unified Center within the SBU or Ukraine Secret Service, because the person that has a status of a missing person can be changed to a POW status or missing in action and so on. So this is what the procedure is. And speaking about children missing under special circumstances, Maryna, the question is to you: what agencies are involved and what are the problems? Well, I would like to say that the national police is responsible for searching for these children. So families and parents need to call the police, and if there is a suspicion that the child was deported, we can also address the Human Rights Commissioner within the Parliament. But since the full-scale invasion, the parents and families faced new challenges. Back in the days, we had mostly children who fled their families, but after the full-scale invasion, we had a lot more children that are missing for different reasons. For example, their parents were killed, or they were took from their families and taken somewhere else. And sometimes it's a distant family member, or just a witness, or a family friend, or a friend. And these people sometimes don't have a relevant photo, what's required for the search actions to be started. And if we're talking about Mariupol, sometimes people don't know any circumstances of that situation. And sometimes there's information that parents died and somebody says they're alive, but nobody knows where they are. So it makes the search a lot more difficult, even for the police, when we don't have the children's photos and we don't have any possibility to collect information, evidence from the witnesses about the person missing. Another problem that we've changed is when Ukrainian children are missing abroad, not in Russia, but in European countries, where especially during the first stage of the war, sometimes family members just grabbed these kids in the street and tried to get them through the border. And so sometimes just random people could take these children abroad, and then the searches were started, and it was very hard to identify the location of these children if they're abroad, if they're outside of Ukraine. And national police don't have any mandate to search for these children abroad. In that case, our NGO is part of the Missing Children Europe Federation, and we're ready to give our helping hands to the families and the friends of such children to help them find them outside of Ukraine and engage Interpol for the search activities. NGOs do a good job in helping find these people and get them back to the country. And these NGOs, they fill in the gaps. So Olena, Olesya, the question is to you, because you know how the system works. You are the insiders, and you know the problems the families face. So please share your experience. Hello, everyone. Well, first off, unfortunately, since the full-scale invasion almost every family was affected, directly or indirectly, when their family member was abducted, missing, or killed. Right now, our organization helps find military personnel who went missing in the sea, and we have problems with that as well, because it's hard to search for these people and recover their bodies from the sea if they're there. Considering the fact that most of the Black Sea is controlled by the aggressor, we don't have the possibility to access the site, the accident site, and we can't identify if the body is on the boat. And we went searching for the bodies, and we couldn't find them as of today. The problem we are facing, our governmental agencies aren't able to organize this process because of safety issues. This is why we need a third party. The way we see it today, it can be a third country or international organizations that can put a pressure on the aggressor or provide guarantee, like silence period, in order to recover the bodies and so on. It's not just related to the Black Sea. It also deals with occupied territories, because there are bodies, but there is no way to access the bodies and identify them, because lots of areas are mined or shelled. So first and foremost, we need to engage a third country as a mediator or put a pressure on the aggressor by the international community. Unfortunately, the international community is losing focus on the war in our territory, because it's pretty calm over there, and they can't relate. And our job is to remind them and keep reminding them all the time, using all resources available in order to keep them informed about the problem. And the next problem that we're facing today is the dissemination of the Ombudsman office, because that was the only office that kept in touch with the families. This person is Oleg Kotenko, and his assistant is Ivan Angelin, and they directly coordinated families, and they organized meetings, and we provided information. They processed that information using whatever tools they had and communicated with the families and providing them necessary assistance. Now that we understand that this office is disbanded, the question is how they're going to distribute the responsibilities among different structures, how they're going to ensure communication and information exchange and the cooperation between these three structures. Is there any procedure? When we had the process up and running, now it's going to be shared among these three structures. We know there's going to be chaos. Now, these three different agencies will be responsible, and the question is, who are going to ask these questions, like, show us some results, or tell us more about what you're doing. So now it's getting pretty complicated. There is no single algorithm of actions. We haven't seen any, and it wasn't explained what person or agency will be responsible for the communication, and we don't understand who's going to be responsible for that. We weren't introduced to that person, and when that person will be assigned, the question is whether this person will be efficient or experienced, because we need to understand if that person knows how it happens and how other parties are engaged to make it efficient. So we would like to listen to what our government thinks about that. We, the families, NGOs, not only speaking on behalf of my NGO, because we have many interested parties and stakeholders. We don't know what's going to happen, and we're not sure about the efficiency of that decision. Olena, the floor is yours. Can you please share your experience and your vision of the problems that we're facing? Yeah. We had this, how to say it the right way, a possibility to talk to certain agencies. But I tell you that our organization is not happy with what's happening right now. And it's not just full-scale invasion in our country. It's a real war going on. Children are dying. Our families are dying. Military personnel, civilians. And now it's high time to talk about it. We're dealing with searching for missing persons since 2022 when our family members went missing. It happened a year and a half ago, and it keeps happening, and we still get requests. And after these functions were transferred from the ombudsperson to the coordination staff and Ministry of Defense and so on, people keep asking us what we should do. The Ministry of Internal Affairs, yeah, they are providing us with these excerpts and information. Sometimes they say there is no entry in the database. And it happens pretty often. It still happens. So the registry is not working properly. How can you add more functions to it? And we also know that the Ministry of Defense, they have a hotline since 2022, but unfortunately, it wasn't communicated to the public. The public doesn't know where to call, and when they do call, there is no feedback. Now that the coordination staff is responsible for getting the bodies back, my question is, what happens with the POWs? Why are you taking more responsibility? You know how hard it is to get the POWs back. It's very hard to get civilians back and children. It's very hard. Now you are just overloading yourself with another task. My question is to Mr. Shmigal, Mrs. Vereshchuk. Why did you make that decision? There is no public information. There is no reply. So far, nobody has explained why that happened. What was the situation behind it? Because we know that it was initiated by Mrs. Vereshchuk to disband that position, that office. Now the war is going on. Why the human rights ombudsperson is engaged? Why are we disbanding that office? Is war going on? Why? What should we do next? Now we are receiving thousands of requests, especially after that information was disseminated through the mass media. And people keep saying, what should we do? Yesterday we had a press conference where we gathered NGOs, and we invited all media centers. Unfortunately, nobody came except the family members. And we don't know why. Yesterday, we told stories about getting back bodies of people who were tortured to death. And there were people who wanted to be heard. The coordination staff promised them, we're going to get back every person, everybody. We want our family members back, not as bodies. And a lot of people are missing in Lugansk region, Liman, Pokrovsk, Kupiansk. And there is no information about that. There are lots of losses there. And family members keep calling us every day. And we have a hotline in our NGO, and we are trying to coordinate them. We're trying to help everyone. We are carrying about 52 units of the armed forces. Lots of families. And it's pretty hard. We want to be heard, and we want to help. We want help. Because getting bodies back is a humanitarian mission. We don't have any funds. Who's going to pay for the refrigerator vehicles? Because it was paid by international and humanitarian organizations. Who's going to do that? Thank you. It's probably an open question. Based on your experience, how this process is going to look like, is supposed to look like, to be efficient, knowing all the gaps, what parties need to be engaged, and how it's going to be implemented. Well, the procedure should be organized in such a way to make it more efficient. Because the point is to get everyone back as living persons or bodies, whatever it takes. Families should not face problems we talk about, and it should be regulated by the legislation so that it can't be interpreted in different ways. It should be clear. And speaking about the dissemination of the Ombudsman office, well, this office is in the law, and the law is adopted by the parliament. This is just when they disbanded the commission that was replaced by the ombudsperson. So it's in the law, and the law describes the mandate of that person. When they want to redistribute the responsibilities, well, it's in the law, but it's also in the document and the regulation about the ombudsperson. So you can really disband that office only after the law is amended. As of today, apart from information in mass media and some information from the government and the Ministry of Reintegration about, their meeting, there is no official document. Nobody has seen it. So what kind of order is that? What kind of decree, or maybe some other legislation, act, or regulation? It's not there. So in order to make it work, we need to communicate the problems faced by the families. And we shouldn't have the situation when these families are waiting for the DNA profiles to be entered into the system. They're waiting for 5-7 months, and they keep receiving answers like there is some problem in the procedure. Well, there shouldn't be any discomfort. They just need to visit the police, have their DNA samples taken, and it should be in the register. Sometimes families received information about the match after the body was already buried, because they entered the reference information, the DNA profile for the families. And it happened late. So if it's a procedure that is complicated, you need to engage more specialists. Or you need to increase the number of investigators dealing with these investigations, because the Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast police, they are so overloaded with work. I don't even know how they're going to conduct searches and investigations for these missing persons under special circumstances. And we are mostly talking about military personnel. Maybe they need to create search groups, or they need to distribute these functions among different units, but I'm not sure it's going to be 100% efficient. So this should be regulated and considered to make sure there's a single algorithm and procedure for these missing persons, and for agencies involved to be as efficient as possible, instead of waiting for the DNA match results for 7 to 8 months. Because we all know about the Olenivka tragedy. We know that the bodies were returned last year, but for some reason, families of people that died in that accident, in that incident, they started getting the results before the anniversary on the 29th of August. Maybe they wanted to show some results and wanted to like a show off. It shouldn't happen. If some organizations need to be engaged, we need to sign contracts with them. We need to do that, because number of people is not decreasing. Number of people missing, it's keeps increasing, while we have the counterattack, while we have active hostilities. More military personnel and more civilians go missing. So in order to define the right mechanism, you need to consider the points of view of families and people in the cabinet of ministers and the parliament, those who adopt legislation acts that regulate the further actions. Thank you. I would like to add, just to follow up to that answer, what needs to be done to make it work efficiently. If we're talking about children, the situation is such that there shouldn't be any difference in the positions between different governmental agencies. But I agree with Olena. Donetsk, Lugansk, and Khersonsk Oblast, these are areas that were under occupation, or these are the areas where hostilities are ongoing, and police forces, they don't have the right resource. I'm not saying they're not doing that. They keep doing that. But in order to make it work efficiently, we need to be engaged. All of us, NGOs, and national police units, and other governmental agencies, private sector, mass media, international organizations. If we're talking about deported children, well, I'd say that Ukrainian governmental agencies, NGOs, they can't fill in the gaps, because we know what we're dealing with. This is why we need some more pressure and international efforts, not just the diplomats, but all international community, because we know that victory is imminent, but we need to do whatever it takes to get these children back, because we don't know how long it's going to last. we don't want our children to be raised abroad. We need more resources, human resources, because we really don't have enough people. Every investigator has 400 to 500 cases to work on. They physically don't have enough time to process them and issue requests for DNA samples to be taken. We need to work hard on that because we lose a lot of time. Families lose time and we don't have time because they want their relatives back. And just to finalize it, they are hiring more people in the national police. That's the information that we received. But we don't know how much time it's going to take to train them all. And number two, I would like to support my colleagues here. We need to join our efforts, all of us, because it's war. And we need to stay together, and we need to support our government, because they can't do it alone. We need to have each other's backs. We need to get together and help each other overcome these obstacles, and we can do it, but only together. Thank you. So, dear journalists, do you have any questions to our guests? Hello? I'm not a journalist. I'm a wife of a civilian prisoner of war. I would like to give you a follow-up on how these families and wives of civilian and military missing persons live. So we had to join our efforts as a civil organization, civilians, as prisoners of war. Some families, they have information. Some families have no information about their loved ones. And my husband is a writer, is a blogger, he's a journalist. He's a retired major. He's in Simferopol now, in Crimea. He's in court. He's persecuted for spying. And he can be imprisoned for 10 to 20 years. But there are wives and families that envy me, my situation. They say you're lucky because you know that your husband is alive. You know what's going on. And that's total nonsense. I have many negative emotions. I found my husband not without the help of a governmental agency. I found him with the help of different NGOs, ZMINA, and others, and I wasn't afraid. I stood out, I spoke up, and they found my husband. He was invisible for 9 months. They didn't show him anything to read. However, people who were released from prison, they told me they didn't identify themselves because they were afraid for their lives. They said, your husband in jail in Crimea. But there wasn't any clarification from the Red Cross or any other organization. This is why families, they are just on their own. And it's pretty hard. And I would like to address our leaders, our government, ombudsperson's office. We need to do more. We need to speak more on the international platforms. We need to appeal to third parties, asking for help in finding our loved ones. Thank you very much. Do you have any questions? Well, if there are no questions, thank you very much. I would like to remind you that this is International Day of the Disappeared, and we talked about how families of the people missing in Ukraine live during the war. We will continue 12 o'clock, and we'll talk about the situation in Zaporizhia. Please stay with us.